Hi, welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the initial washes I've done on this watercolor. Now, this may look very pale with very little contrast, but that is how I work when I do washes, when I start a painting. I've put in some mountains in the background, trying to go for a more lavender purple. I've put in various grasses here and there, some grasses in the foreground, worked on the barn a little bit with some greenery adjacent to it, and just lightly did some washes on the trees. At this stage, I don't want to put a lot of color into this. I want to keep it nice and loose. And if we can go to the original reference photo, it's highly detailed, and I try to keep my work less detailed, especially when working in watercolor. I like it fresh, I like it fast, I like to keep the pigment loose, and part of that is putting down a wash like this. I'll build on this as I go along. The piece that I'm also comparing it to is this little oil, and that's fairly complex but still kind of loose. I enjoy working with watercolor because of the flow that I get with it, the immediacy, the freshness. To look at the color palette I've used, these are my mixing wells. I use a sap green, a warm yellow, burnt sienna. I'll throw in some yellow ochre. I'll throw in some French ultramarine and use that to create some of these greens that I've got here. And then we can look at what I use for the purple. I used a magenta and a little bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue to kind of knock it back a little bit, to gray it somewhat. And I used that for these hills here. I wanted to give them a sense of distance. They tend to look almost lavender in the landscape around here. Now for the grasses in the foreground, I used a cadmium orange, a warm yellow, burnt sienna, and I also used a permanent red for that. And I've got these grasses. This is, again, an initial wash in the foreground. And then I want to make this the focal point. I want to make the barn redder. I want it to contrast with the green, and I use the same basic mixture for that as here, and I moved it over here and created my dark grays, which I'm going to need for shadows on the barn and for the dark windows. So that's kind of the process with this. Again, this is an initial wash, very loose, very random. Some artists build on this and keep it this loose. I tend to like to give it a little bit more detail. So that's what we're working on. It's the first step on paper. So keep practicing, have a creative day, and thanks for watching. My next installment will show the next level of this painting.